Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Calls. This is the 2023 Fall FedEx Bermuda Championship Initial Research Show. Hope you had a very successful Worldwide Technologies, a much better one than mine. For yours truly, it was pretty disappointing. I had several good suggestions for you, a couple of really bad suggestions for you. So my DFS roster constructions didn't turn out all that well, even with some of the very unique good plays there were. I was nowhere near Eric Van Rooyen, not near Kuchar, didn't want any part of Justin Suh. So in the end, not enough high-end finishers for me in DFS. And then for outright wagers, all of the players that I wagered to make the cut ended up finishing in the top 20, but top 20 isn't a win. So did not cross the finish line there in terms of outright wagers. But if you had success for the Worldwide Technologies, let me know in chat or in the comments of the show, or reach out to me on social media. Would love to be able to shout out members of the community who had success this past week. But we move forward to a course and a tournament we've seen before, albeit very little on the PGA Tour in the grand scheme of things. We are in Bermuda for the Butterfield Bermuda Championship. So let's get into it. All statistics provided tonight and every night are from FantasyNational.com. It is the best golf analytics tool out there. It's going to make you much better in terms of being a DFS player, golf DFS player. It's going to make you much more informed on your golf wagers. So go check out FantasyNational.com. You will not regret it. In the description to the video, there are links to all of my social media, my X and Instagram, where I post research around previous winners and course history and all of that every week for the PGA Tour. That'll be no different. I'll have some of that out tomorrow. So if you want to see the weekly research that I do for the PGA Tour, give me a follow at your preferred social media site. X is also where I post my betting cards weekly on the PGA Tour. Those come out every Wednesday evening after the DFS Tactics show. And I also show you my player exposure Wednesday evenings as well. So if you want to see those, give me a follow over there. And then lastly, for social media, Gabe's handle is in the description. He writes a very good article called The Fringe. He had a fantastic start to the Worldwide Technologies. I do believe he fell off a little bit, just like I did once the cut was made. But he writes a very good article called The Fringe. And if you are a subscriber to that article, which is free to do, by the way, you are going to be able to join us in his Substack chat every Wednesday evening after calls as we continue the DFS discussion over in his Substack chat. Again, the only way you're going to be able to join us is if you are a subscriber to his article. So go show Gabe some support. Follow him on social media. Subscribe to that article. Lastly, we are live. Chat is open. Again, want to hear from you all if you had success or even if you didn't. What did you learn about El Diamante and Tiger's first course seen on the PGA Tour? Do you want to see it come back? And then for the Bermuda, how much do you know of Port Royal? Who do you think has the upper hand beginning your week of research? So let's do our initial research for the 2023 Fall FedEx Bermuda Championship. And we are going to start, as we always do, on a Sunday evening with the GCSAA tournament fact sheet. And I will zoom in here a little bit. We are in Southampton, Bermuda, at Port Royal Golf Course. Another one of these Caribbean-style events, but unique in its own right. Mainly because, as you can guess, Bermuda, the Butterfield Bermuda, has Bermuda greens, not paspalum. These are Bermuda greens. We have Bermuda throughout all of the course, with the exception of a little bit of zoysia mixed in to the fairways, specifically on its back nine. But Tiff Eagle Bermuda on greens, and then 419 Bermuda throughout the rest of the course. And tomorrow I will make sure to have some comparison courses, at least in terms of Tiff Eagle Bermuda grass. Did not have a chance to do that today. So for tomorrow, I will make sure to have some comparison courses for Tiff Eagle Bermuda specifically. Some other notes here around Port Royal. This is originally a Robert Trent Jones Sr. design, renovated in 2008. Port Royal, very, very, very short course. It is a par 71 measuring just over 6,800 yards there. 6,828 yards. An extremely short course, especially being a par 71. So that tells you that the par 5s, and there are 3 of them, that are going to be very short, and there are several, and I mean several, very short par 4s. The green sizes, comparable to what we just saw at El Diamante, 8,000 square feet on average here at Port Royal. So again, some massive greens. However, these fairways are pretty narrow. 21 acres of fairway in total. That is the second lowest total that I have seen in quick memory. The narrowest or least amount of fairway is at Torrey Pines. But 21 acres fairway, not a lot. Granted, with these holes not being very long, probably imagine they might be fairly wide at some places. But there is quite a bit of undulation on this course, a lot of elevation change, so these fairways can get a little bit difficult to hit. Not a lot of rough either, only 48 acres of rough on the course. There are 7 holes with water in play, and as I mentioned before, we are on Bermuda greens, specifically Tiff Eagle, and I will have some comparison courses for you all tomorrow in terms of Tiff Eagle greens. Another big factor, as is a lot of times in these Caribbean events, is weather. 2 years ago, or maybe now 3 years ago, when Lucas Herbert won, the Sunday round was atrocious. 40-mile-an-hour winds, sideways rain. We'll see starting tomorrow and then moving into Wednesday evening show what the forecast is. So that is always going to be an important part in these Caribbean style events, what the wind and weather is doing. If you were able to see much of the worldwide technologies, you would see that the course was very, very easy, and its real only defense is the wind, which did not pick up at all this week, hence why we saw extremely low scores. But there's a look at the Butterfield, Bermuda, and Port Royal golf course from a GCSA tournament fact sheet. We are going to be focused on very short courses this week, very large greens, 7 holes with water in play, so there is danger on the course if you are not careful, and Tiff Eagle Bermuda greens. So with that, we'll move to Fantasy National. Let me get this set for the last 36 rounds and the beginning of this calendar year. And we have a fairly weak field, as is per usual here at the Butterfield Bermuda. Lucas Glover, now Adam Scott is here. He's making his fall debut, or maybe one other event. Now I'm going to have to check. He might have played one other event. Yeah, the Zozo. Okay. So Adam Scott is here, but the bigger names definitely not here. Lucas Glover is your number 1 total performer. Luke List, a winner twice on the PGA Tour. Chad Ramey's a winner. Brendan Todd has won a few, but not a lot of big names here at the Bermuda Championship, as is customary. So there's a look at your top performers in the last 36 rounds on the PGA Tour. Before we go any further, let's go ahead and check the Fantasy National course breakdown and take a look at Port Royal in that regard in terms of a scorecard and graphical view. First thing I like to do is take a look at where the 9th and 10th most difficult holes are, figure out where par is, and that gives us an idea on the difficulty of the course. Well, the 9th and 8th most difficult hole play to par, which is actually, it's right on average, honestly a little bit more on the difficult end. And even though this is a very short course, you think of these Caribbean events being very easy. Port Royal is not. Port Royal does play to average most of the time. Now, the par 5 second plays to a third of a shot under par. The very short par 5 seventh plays to a half a shot under par, and then a third of a shot, or a little bit more than a third of a shot under par on the par 5 17th. And those are certainly very gettable holes. But when you look at the other end of the spectrum, there are some difficult holes here at Port Royal. The par 3 16th plays to a quarter of a shot over par, 2/10ths, 1800ths, 1500ths, or close to it, a tenth. There are bogeys to be had, and then, of course, on that very long, difficult par 3, there are some double bogeys there as well. So a good mix of scoreable opportunities, and especially a stretch of golf 13 through 16, where if you're coming out at even par, you're probably gaining strokes on the field. So a good variety of holes here, nothing very long. Again, the 3 par 5s, you got a 507 and a 517, which are very, very short for PGA Tour standards. Longest hole on the course, 553. The length of the course, whatever length there is in these par 3s. Now, yes, you do have a 148 par 3, the par 3 third, but the others are measure very long, 213, 235, 235. So very, very long par 3s, other than the first par 3 you encounter if you're playing hole 1, the par 3 third. We move down to average strokes gained by hole by par. You see we don't have any strokes gained metrics. We don't have any shot link data in that regard. No approach, no off the tee, putting, or anything. We just have strokes gained by hole by par. No surprise here, especially with the ease and lack of length on these par 5s. They are the ones that are leading in terms of strokes gained, but it's not by a lot because all of the players are taking advantage of the par 5s. So for your top 10s, par 3s slightly outweighing the par 4s. We go into the top 5s, much more the same, although the par 5s do gain a little bit of traction because of probably some eagles. And then for our winners, par 4s is where it's at. If you're able to catch an eagle on a par 4, not very many of them, 2/10ths and 1/10th, but generally you're going to be playing these par 4s much better than your playing competitors. You got a 25% birdie rate here on the par 4 5th, 21% on the par 4 6th, so 2 back-to-back pretty short par 4s that play easy. So there's where your winners are making all of their strokes against their competition, is in these par 4s. And the par 3s, a little bit surprising that they fall off. They're just very difficult. So I imagine most players are playing them right around par, maybe a little bit over par. The par 5s are getting taken advantage of, and the separation is in the par 4s. We move to hole composition. As we talked about before, the 4 par 3s, there's one extremely short par 3, 148. Then the other 3 par 3s are very long. You have a 213, I believe it was. 148, yeah, 213. 213, and then 2 that measure at 235. So long par 3s. So another course that we could be looking at a focus of 200 plus par 3s. Our par 4s, more than half of them, 6 of the 11, are 350 to 400. So extremely short par 4s here at Port Royal. 4 par 4s from 400 to 450. Only 1 from 450 to 500. Hey, James, good to see you in chat. Thanks for jumping in. Haven't seen you in a while. Hope things have went well. I know I haven't done anything in terms of showdown in the fall. I've been very, very busy and actually have taken on a little bit more responsibility at my local church. And with the time changes and stuff, it's been pretty difficult because some of these courses don't even finish their round 2 on Friday nights. But it is good to see you in chat. Hopefully everything has been well and you are successful in your endeavors. But with the par 4, only one long or fairly long one, and no par 4s above 500 plus. So again, extremely short in terms of par 4s, and then the par 5s, 2 extremely short par 5s, 507, 517, one fairly long one at 557. So there's a look at the whole composition. Scoring distribution, yes, there are several birdies to be had. That's thanks to majority of the par 5s, or mostly the par 5s, 21%. Few bogeys, 14.5%, but the doubles, the bar is pretty visible. So while there are more scores under par than over par, there are certain areas of the course, particularly this difficult stretch on the back 9, where par is a generally good score. And we're going to see that this plays pretty much at average. Now, the historic cut line last year was the easiest it had been. I don't believe the wind was much of a factor, at least for the cut portion of the event. You see the cut was -5. Very, very easy. But the other 3 years, we were +1, +2, and -1. Right around, terms of average, with the exception of last year. And we'll see what the weather forecast is starting tomorrow and figure out if we think we're going to want to focus on any difficult to par or easy to par filters. But just because this is an extremely short course and a Caribbean style event, alternate field style event, not necessarily the easiest, as you can see from the historic cut line, especially if the weather is not cooperative. Driving accuracy, again, these fairways are undulating and they are pretty narrow. So driving accuracy here, much less than the tour average, although that is also taking into consideration that the rough is not difficult to play out of. So we'll see, especially later tonight, that driving distance is a decent factor, even though we don't have that much of that data. We have a little bit, and what there is, driving distance seems to be a little bit. Green regulation percentage, again, speaking to a little bit of the difficulty of Port Royal. These greens are massive, 8,000 square feet, and you're right at tour average in terms of greens. A lot to do with the winds that can pick up. There are protections for these greens, certain runoffs and such that you saw similar to El Cardinal at Diamante last week. Scrambling percentage, however, is not too difficult here. Much more successful here than at the average tour event. 3 putts per round, about tour average, which is probably what you would expect for large greens. So there's a look at Port Royal from a scorecard and graphical view here in Fantasy National. We'll come back to the player page view. First thing we're going to do, we saw, with the length of the holes, individual holes, we saw in the GCSSA, I can't even talk, GCSAA tournament fact sheet, how short this course is, 6,800 yards. Let's see, how many rounds do we have? 27? Yeah, that should be enough. Most players have double digits and into the teens. So in this calendar year, our top performers on short courses, those defined as less than 7,200 yards per Fantasy National. Our top performers on short courses, Brendan Todd, Adam Scott, Mark Hubbard, Ben Martin, Ryan Gerard, Dylan Wu, Tyler Duncan, Alex Smalley, Cameron Percy, and Brandon Wu. Let's see. We're not going to look at off the tee per se until probably tomorrow, only because I want to figure out if I want to factor in fairways as well. So let's just take a look at strokes gained approach. I'll make sure to remove the short course filter, no architect filter. This is a Robert Trent Jones Sr. design. We don't know about the wind yet, although I imagine my guess would be we're going to be looking at moderate and windy conditions. We'll start looking at that tomorrow. So let's take a look at our best iron players or strokes gained approach players in the field this week for the Bermuda. Lucas Glover, Mark Hubbard, Kevin Roy, Alex Smalley, Doug Gim, Ryan Moore, Russell Knox, Justin Lauer, Kelly Craft, and Charlie Hoffman. Before we check putting, just very quickly, I do want to look at the historic conditions, see if we can't get a feel for some of these green speeds. And again, you see last year, both of the rounds that were full field were easy, which led to the -5 cut. But easy rounds aren't necessarily the norm here at Port Royal. In 2022, you had 2 rounds that were difficult, 2 rounds that were easy. You had average, difficult, average, and easy. So, again, this will play to probably right around average unless the wind is really, really down. Of course, we are on Bermuda greens, but what I wanted to see, these green speeds, so Velcro, 1 year of average, but they've generally kept them slow, which is to be expected, especially with the amount of wind they generally get in the Caribbean and these Caribbean style events. You got to keep the greens pretty slow just to make sure that players are able to play. So we're going to be looking at Bermuda, absolutely. I don't know how much, I meant to click Velcro. I don't know how much Velcro Bermuda we actually get on the PGA Tour. Yeah, in fact, in 2023, there have been no rounds that were Velcro Bermuda. And 8 rounds in 2022. So we had the Century and the Bermuda Championship. So I'm not comfortable limiting it to just Velcro. So if we look at Velcro and average, again, not a whole lot of rounds here. 23 from Lucas Glover, but majority of players have in the lower teens. So this is a fairly small sample size, just understand that. But I do want to look at slower speed greens, Velcro and average. Although they're mostly going to be Velcro would be my guess. I don't think there's enough data to substantiate looking at just Velcro. So let's look at slower speed Bermuda greens. So since the beginning of 2022, our top putters in a small sample on Velcro and average speed greens, average speed Bermuda greens. Troy Merritt, Kelly Craft, Ben Griffin, Richie Wierenski, Lucas Herbert, Doc Redman, Aaron Baddeley, Eric Van Rooyen, the winner at El Cardinal, Harry Hall, and Jonas Blixt. So there's your top 10 in terms of Velcro and average speed Bermuda greens. All right, let's see. Elsewhere, what else we can take a look at before we dig into some data, some more specific data here. Let's just take a look at par 4 efficiency, and particularly 350 to 4 par 4 efficiency, because 6 of the 11 par 4s measure to that length here at Port Royal. And we saw in the breakdown in Fantasy National, the par 4s have been a massive factor for our winners the 4 years that the Bermuda has been played. So I think par 4s are going to carry significant weight, which is a little bit different from the last couple of tournaments we've had, especially at El Diamante, or El Cardinal at Diamante. It was more so the par 5s and those par 3s. So our top par 4 performers, let's make sure we are in this calendar year. So our top par 4 performers from 350 to 400 yards this calendar year, last 36 rounds: Adam Scott, Chad Ramey, Luke List, Chesson Hadley, Lucas Glover, Brent Grant, Mark Hubbard, Lonto Griffin, Brandon Wu, Kelly Craft, and Camilo Villegas. All right, with that, because we have played at Port Royal and have seen Port Royal in years past, we are now able this week to come back and look at some prior course history. So we'll take a look at the tournament history tab, or the strokes gained total tab. Here in Fantasy National, your overwhelming strokes gained total leader here at Port Royal is Brian Gay. Tied for third in the inaugural Butterfield Bermuda. Wins in 2021, and then 2 top 15s the past 2 years. Russell Knox has played extremely well here. Kramer Hickok, David Hearn, Thomas Detry in 2 tournaments has played extremely well, including the runner-up last year. Brennan Todd was your inaugural Bermuda Championship winner. You had Lucas Herbert, again in the monsoon torrential crazy weather that we had in 2022, was your champion, and your defending Bermuda Championship winner is not here this week. It's Seamus Power, but he is not playing this year. So yeah, Brian Gay, Russell Knox, some other notable players here. Alex Smalley has been very, very good the past 2 years, in his 2 years here. Ryan Armour has 2 top 10s, a clunker and a miscut. The one time Lucas Herbert has been here, he won. Chesson Hadley, 2 top 20s. Sean O'Hare, T22 and a tie 11th. Stuart Sinkin is 1 time tied for 4th. So there's a few names for you if you are big in terms of prior course performance that you want to single in on. Justin Lauer, tie 17th and a tie 8th. The other end of the spectrum, players who have not played well here at the Bermuda Championship. Ricky Barnes, 2 for 4, but the 2 cuts made have been not inspiring at all. Greg Chalmers, 1 for 2. Bo Van Pelt, 0 for 3. Let's see some other notable names, perhaps. K.H. Lee, 2 for 2, but just like Ricky Barnes, nothing notable in terms of a finish. Robert Garrigus, 2 for 3 with a withdrawal. Ryan Brim, 2 for 3, but nothing really of note except for maybe a middling T26. Harry Hall, who I was very, very high on due to his performance at comparison courses for last week, has not played the Bermuda very well at all. Only 1 for 2. Martin Trainer, 0 for 2. Lucas Glover, your number 1 strokes gained total performer the last 36 rounds in this tournament. 1 for 1, but a pretty poor finish. DA points, 2 for 3. So there's a look at the players who haven't played the Bermuda Championship all that well. And that's a good segue to go over to Microsoft Excel as we can take a look at some comparison course metrics this week. Again, we have seen Port Royal in the Bermuda Championship for 4 years. So in terms of data, it is still relatively new, but consistent enough that we can start to gain some perspective on how Port Royal plays. Of course, we don't have any shot link for Port Royal, so no strokes gained numbers. This is why I was thinking that driving distance might have something, at least by the data, 30% more important here at Port Royal than your average full field consistent course on the PGA Tour. Even though the fairways are pretty narrow, they're not necessarily the most important, only 4% less important. So right around PGA Tour average. These greens are massive. You see 2.5% less important. Just don't feel like greens like at El Cardinal. Don't think they are going to be a big factor this week. Just massive. Now scoring, Eagles might be something we want to look at because of the ease of these par fives. So we'll take a look at the prior leaderboards tomorrow in the Data Dive show, figure out if Eagles might be something that we want to look at. But at least in terms of by the numbers here, it looks like it might be something we want to consider. Birdies and bogeys, like you would expect in a tournament that is roughly average in terms of difficulty. Look, the birdies and the bogeys are pretty darn close to PGA Tour averages. A little bit more important on both. So not sure we're going to have much to look at in terms of scoring except for maybe eagles, which means this might be an opportunities gained type of week, which also would make sense due to the fact these greens are so big. You want to see who's giving themselves the most opportunities. We move to the specific par 3s, 4s, and 5s. And a little bit surprising to me to see that the par 3s are actually close to 20% more important when for the winners, they really fell off graphically in Fantasy National. But for your top 10s and your top 5s, the par 3s were sticking pretty darn close to the par 4s. You see that the 0 to 150, it's only one hole, is carrying quite a bit. But look at the two par 3s that are measuring 225. 352% more important. That's, of course, a little bit misleading because not every course has 225-yard plus par 3s like the Sony, like Harbor Town. These other short courses generally don't have these long par 3s. So I don't want to put too much weight into that, but that is signifying that they are going to be pretty darn important. Par 4s, a little bit more important than the average consistent PGA Tour course, but look at the big number here. 140% on 350 to 400 par 4s. So again, a massive, massive focus on this range of par 4s we're going to have this week. And then for your par 5s, because the majority of pros are taking advantage of these holes, they're not actually gaining a whole lot, especially compared to other courses. It is the two short par 5s that make up pretty much all of the strokes gained in the par 5s. The 507 and 517 par 5s, 77% more important. So there's a look at Port Royal in terms of comparing it against other consistent full field courses on the PGA Tour. Of course, we don't have shot links, so no proximity data, no strokes gained. But there is a look at Port Royal comparing against other courses. I like to do that for the driving distance, greens, scoring can help a little bit. And then tomorrow in the data dive, we'll really dig in to the specifics around which of these links garner the strokes gained. So my guess is we'll probably want to look at just this range of par 3s. We'll probably be focused on the 350 to 400 par 4s, things of that nature. And then to finalize the show this evening, we're going to go over to the early look file. This is the performance each of the players in the field this week have had at Port Royal specifically in the Bermuda Championship. So you see Lucas Herbert, one event, he won it. That's his average finish of first. Ben Griffin finished third. We saw that the strokes gained total leaders, Brian Gay. He has played all 4 years at Port Royal. He has averaged a 7th place finish. Played this event extremely well. Of course, no miscuts. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to filter out anybody who has not played at least half of them. I want to see the players who have, at least somewhat consistently play Port Royal, what they've been doing well here. Brian Gay, never going to be long off the tee. He's more of a fairway finder, and you see the fairways haven't really mattered. But if a player has played at least half of the Bermuda Championships, I'll go down to the top 40 here. That is 17 players. It'll be enough. Distance is fairly slight. It's only a 6.3. Majority of these players are actually negative in distance. Looking like the fairways might be something. The fairways is actually a 2.1, highlighted by Sean O'Hare. Big number here. Now, Malnati hasn't found many fairways, but has performed well. Detry, much the same. But there's quite a bit more in terms of fairways gained than I would have thought. So we'll see tomorrow in the Data Dive show in the prior leaderboards if fairways gained has been a big factor for your upper echelon finishers. Greens, one player here, Russell Knox, has been very good at hitting these greens or gaining greens. But I don't see these being too much of a factor. Again, these are massive greens, 8,000 square feet. So we'll see again tomorrow in the prior leaderboards how that looks. In terms of scoring, Brian Gay is leading with Eagles. So that's another feather in the cap to perhaps look at Eagles by themselves this week. Few players that are positive there. So maybe we look at that. In terms of birdies versus bogeys, not a single player is negative in terms of birdies gained. Only one player is negative in terms of bogeys avoided. This is a 2.5. The bogeys are a 1.9. So a slight advantage probably to the birdies gained if you want to take that route in terms of scoring. Par threes, a little bit, especially for your premier finishes. Your Brian Gays, your Russell Knoxes, Ryan Armour. They've been playing these par threes pretty well. Thomas Dietrich, 1.0 in the par threes, 4.0 in the par fours. So just, again, highlighting the massive importance that those par fours have had. And then the par fives, 0.9. So, look at the long par threes. You've been playing them well. You're generally playing pretty well here at the Bermuda. Not a single player that's averaged a top 35 or averaged a 35th or better finish is negative. And if we really highlight it, everyone that's finished 20th or better has been pretty good at these par threes in general. Par threes and the 225 plus. Par fours, much the same. Brian Gay's been dominating these par fours. Malnati's played them well. Doc Redman's played them well. Will Gordon has played them extremely well. So look at all the massive amounts of success for these par fours. Massive numbers here in terms of strokes gained, and again, massive numbers in this 350 to 400 range. You have to get down to McGreevy, both in par fours and the 350 to 4, before you hit somebody that's negative in performance here at Port Royal on these holes. So I imagine the 350 to 400 par fours are going to carry significant amount of weight. And then lastly, for par fives, you've got a little bit of some decent performance, but they're not necessarily all that big of a factor. 3.6 from Dietrich was about the same number in par threes. You got 1.1s and 0.6s, 0.2s, 1.2s. It's okay, but not mandatory to play them exceptionally well. There's just not a lot to gain on these par fives since they are so easy. Almost all of the players in the field are going to be birdieing them. And that's why there's such a heavy significance on these par fours of that length and just in the par fours in general. So a little bit of a shorter show, especially since we don't have any strokes gained data. Not a lot to dissect there. So we're digging in as much as we can. And then tomorrow we're going to dig in to the prior leaderboards, see what has really, really performed well here at Port Royal. And we'll give you the players that are best at those specific metrics coming into the field this week for the Butterfield Bermuda Championship. James, thanks for jumping in chat. Good to see you again. Hopefully all has been well. Thanks to everyone else out there who tunes in, watches, listens, supports the channel, likes the videos, comments, and subscribes. Very much appreciated. Love what I do. Taking an in-depth look at sports statistics, golf statistics, trying to give you a data analyst and statistician's perspective of what he sees in the stats, trying to give you the optimal players and advice to give you the best chance to perform well in your DFS lineups and with your wagers. So thanks again for all the support, for all of the wagers you made this past week for the Worldwide Technologies, for all the DFS contests you played this past week for the Worldwide Technologies. Until I see you tomorrow night for the Data Dive Show, may all your bets be profitable.